Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for being here. As some of you already saw yesterday, we had the launch of the hackathon, the welcoming remarks, and the excitement was very high. We have the recordings already on the website. And today we have a day full of learning, and we're kicking off very strong with this incredible session. We are extremely grateful to have the opportunity to have representatives from the three governments that have a modern slavery legislation addressing this crime be here with us today. So today's session is called Introducing the Modern Slavery Legislation in Australia, Canada, and the UK. And we will learn from the experts from those three governments about the three legislations, outlining their purpose, the scope, and how these laws are being implemented. And then they will discuss the policy intent and practical administration of these acts, and speaking particularly on the data element, the collection and analysis of this data. And then we will dive a bit more into the international reporting template that the three governments designed for the companies to be able to respond to this law in a more synchronized manner. So this is going to provide us the background of why are we here, why these laws exist, and how important it is to be able to assess the statements, and why we need your skills to help us make sense of the business's responses to this legislation. And today you will have three potential users if you want to speak in more data or software language. They are the ones that most likely will be using some of the resources you're building. So please listen to any cues that they will provide in terms of what features or what they will be interested in seeing the AI models or the data science or the software that you're building do in terms of assessing the modern slavery statements, and how we can make the enforcement of these legislations through the assessment of the statements more smoothly. And with no further ado, I would like to invite the three panelists to first introduce themselves, and then we will dive into the panel session. So maybe I'll invite first Pierre to introduce yourself, and then Caroline, and then Farid. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Pierre Skorich, and I'm the Director of the Business and Government Engagement Unit in our Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking branch in the Federal Attorney General's Department. So we've got responsibility for the administration of Australia's Modern Slavery Act, which includes ensuring that all of those statements that Adriana was just talking about are compliant with the requirements of the legislation, and also working with businesses to improve compliance over time. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Caroline?
Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Caroline George. I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario in Canada. I'm the acting manager of the Supply Chains Act Task Force at Public Safety Canada, and my team is responsible for the supply chain transparency legislation in Canada. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you. And Farid?
Hi everyone, and yeah, thanks for having me as well. My name is Farid Amir. I work in the UK's Home Office. I'm the lead for forced labour in supply chains policy, and we are responsible for implementing the UK's Modern Slavery Act as well.
Thank you all very much. Pierre, would you mind starting and telling us a little bit more about the Modern Slavery Act here in Australia? Sorry, we have a hands up. Carrie, do you? Oh, no? Okay, no problem then. Let's pass it back to you, Pierre, and telling us more about the Modern Slavery Act here in Australia. Thank you.
Can you see my slide presentation?
Yes.
Okay. And can I just check that it's actually moving? Because I can't see you guys anymore.
It's not moving. It's still on the first slide.
Pierre, it's not in full screen mode.
Okay. Let me try again. Is it working now?
Now it's moving. Yeah.
Now it's moving. We might just have to do it that way, I think. All right. Well, again, thank you for having me this morning and having the opportunity to talk to you at what I think is a really important event. We have ourselves been doing a lot of thinking about how we might be able to deploy artificial intelligence against modern slavery in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about some of the thoughts that I have about where we might be able to deploy it. I might just start very quickly talking about modern slavery. And look, I'm sure you've heard this yesterday, so I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide, but it is a serious issue, and it is an issue that the Australian government takes very seriously, hence why it has legislated to force businesses to do something about those problems, not just in Australia, but in their supply chains as well. And that's because, like, as you can see there in the stat, and this is an older one, but 50 million people are affected by modern slavery around the world. And that modern slavery provides, potential benefits to businesses that are prepared to use those kinds of methods of coercion in terms of lower costs of doing business. And that adds up to, and I think this is US dollars, 236 billion in illegal profits. So even in an Australian context, and people often don't realise that it is a problem in Australia itself, but this is again a couple of years old. The Global Slavery Index estimated that on any day in 2021 that there were 41,000 individuals in modern slavery in Australia itself, and that's about 1.6 people per thousand in Australia. So it is a significant issue. It's a significant issue globally, and it is a significant issue for Australia. So what the Modern Slavery Act does really is it requires large businesses, and when I say large businesses, that's businesses that make 100 million more in consolidated revenue. So that's revenue at a whole of kind of portfolio structure level, rather than just a single business. And what they need to do is to report every year on what they're doing to assess and address modern slavery in their supply chains and operations. And I'll go into a bit more detail about what the reporting criteria are, but there are 7 of them. All of those statements then are published online, which makes them visible to every part of the community. So every part of the community can understand what those businesses are doing about addressing modern slavery. And I'll touch on why that's important in a second. The other thing that's really key to this is that it requires the approval of the principal governing body or the board of those businesses. So what that means really is that it's creating an environment where boards need to be thinking about modern slavery. And so it's not just somewhere within the organization, the ESG parts of it, but it's the heads of organizations really need to sign off on those modern slavery statements. And therefore it draws attention onto what businesses are doing about modern slavery and what their modern slavery risk is at that top executive level. And in terms of what we do in the Attorney General's Department, we are both the compliance and the support unit for ensuring that they are able to comply with the obligations of Australia's Modern Slavery Act. So we both check compliance, and you'll see a little bit more about that in a sec, but also we do things to try and help and encourage businesses to be able to comply. So providing guidance and education and presentations like this one. In terms of why reporting is important, I kind of touched on from a business perspective, it obviously pushes modern slavery into the center of focus for businesses. If they have got to report on it, they've got to think about it, they've got to understand their risks, and they've got to be able to articulate those risks, and they've got to be able to articulate them in a way that is going to tell consumers and tell investors that they are actually taking the problem seriously and that they are really doing something about it. So it is driving action in terms of addressing modern slavery. I think from a civil society perspective, which is obviously one audience, and I mention all these audiences because I think that's, talking about it as Adriana said, from a user perspective, there are different cohorts of users that are going to be important when it comes to how modern slavery or any AI tools are used. From a civil society perspective, it promotes transparency for them in terms of what businesses are doing what, and because they're already active in the space, their ability to analyze those statements gives them the ability to have informed advocacy about where the problems are and where they need to be focusing their efforts as well in trying to address the problem at a local and a global level. From an investment perspective, one of the purposes of the Act really is to also be able to drive some of that ethical investment into sectors where they are dealing with modern slavery well. And I think, again, enabling investors to be able to understand at a systemic level where they can and should be investing, it has a real potential to, again, drive further action in the modern slavery space. From a government perspective, obviously we are the kind of enforcers of the legislation, but it also gives us insight into who's doing what and where good practice lies, and where some of those opportunities are to both strengthen legislative frameworks or to provide additional support to businesses across different sectors. So where one sector is doing very well, how do we bring those good practices across different businesses? And obviously, from a consumer perspective, if they can understand who's doing well on modern slavery, who has good supply chains, then it can also drive consumer behavior and consumers towards those markets as well. As I said, in terms of what the Modern Slavery Act requires, it has 7 criteria that businesses must meet when they put their modern slavery statements in. And I think, as Farid will talk about a little bit later, these are quite similar to ones that are in Canada and the UK. So for us, the key one I talked about before is that the principal governing body, and they can be different types, but basically the head of the organisation, the governing body, must approve and sign off on that statement, and that just tells us that statement is a duly agreed one, and that it represents the views of that organisation, and it's the one that we treat quite seriously. The other ones are that obviously it's got to identify the reporting entity, or in the circumstances where it has multiple entities in it, that all of those entities are described and identified within that modern slavery statement. The modern slavery statements have to describe the structure and operations and supply chain. So that's so we can understand, and so the public can understand, well, what is the risk within these supply chains? What are they? And what does that business actually do? And how is it structured? I guess the most important one then is the description of the risks of modern slavery in those global operations and supply chains, so that it really drives business to be able to articulate what do they understand about the risks that they have. And again, you'll see a lot of variability, I think, in terms of some businesses have got a really deep understanding of what their supply chains look like and where modern slavery risk is, whereas other ones have a more shallow understanding of it, or might even say that there is no risk, and different judgments about how much they've done their risk assessments in that space. The other thing that they've got to describe is what actions that they've taken to address the risks, and that includes, 2 particular call-outs: the due diligence that they've done on those supply chains, and what sort of remediation processes they have in place in terms of dealing with instances of modern slavery if they occur. They also need to describe how they assess their effectiveness, so they're not just putting in place measures, but that they actually review and measure the effectiveness of those actions over time, so that they can continuously improve on what they're doing to address modern slavery. The other thing that's very important, and again you'll see it's a bit problematic, is the process of consultation with subsidiaries and other reporting entities for joint statements. So one thing that is key is also that the modern slavery statement, where it covers other entities, it covers them, and that they all have been consulted on what that modern slavery statement means, meaning that it represents the kind of the full perspective on every entity that forms part of that statement. And then the other one is any other relevant information. So businesses can also choose to include other things in there. I'm going to flick through some of the other ones a bit more quickly. So all of those statements get published on the Modern Slavery Statements Register. You can see a few statistics across the bottom there in terms of how many we've got. So there's almost 25,000 entities that are covered on the Modern Slavery Statements at the moment. There are 5 Commonwealth ones. So the Commonwealth itself also has to report. Out of the statements that are up there, there are, again, about 13 and a half mandatory ones. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that under the legislation, entities can also choose if they don't meet the threshold to report. And so there are a bunch of voluntary statements on there as well. In terms of our assessment process, and I'm just going to do this quickly, but basically every single statement that comes in, we have a 2-person review process, and that's partially because of the complexity of those statements. And once that has been reviewed for compliance with every one of those criteria, it will go for a decision about whether to publish or not. So in the legislation, there are 2 ways. One of them is if it's a fully compliant statement, once it's been assessed, there's a duty to publish it on the register. If it's a non-compliant statement, then there is a discretion about whether or not that statement should be published or not. In practice, the policy position that we've arrived at is that basically most non-compliant statements will also be published. And that's because it achieves the transparency objective of the legislation. So you can compare what is a good statement with one that's less good, I suppose, if you're a consumer or an investor. The ones that we don't publish are ones where the principal governing body and signature are not either present or are ambiguous. And that's because we want to ensure that everything that is published on there genuinely reflects the views of the business that has put them up. I'm just going to touch on this slightly as well, but on the Modern Slavery Statements Register, there is a whole series of guidance resources that help business, but will also help hackathon participants to understand it from the Australian perspective, what should be included within a modern slavery statement and what good looks like. And you can see here very briefly, we've got a series of what we call supplementary guidance, and those supplementary guidance set out some of the hypothetical examples of where a statement would be compliant, where it would be good practice, and where it would be non-compliant, and a little bit of a description of what does the Act require under that particular heading. And across the top there, you can see when you go on the Modern Slavery Statements Register, you'll have a page that's called Resources that you can access all of this if it's useful to you. I thought I'd touch very quickly on compliance rates. So over the reporting periods, we've had a reasonably high level of compliance, and you can see it's improved over time since the first year. This is about which ones are publishable and non-publishable, so which ones have been properly approved or not, and the other ones are around compliance. So you can see again from the original ones where we were slightly more compliant than non-compliant, the compliance rate has gotten up to in the mid-80s now over the years, and that's due to a lot of work that we've been doing to try and help businesses to comply, as well as obviously work that they've put into improving. The other thing that I thought was worth showing you quickly is the compliance trends at the criteria level. So the ones that we have the most issues, I think, with compliance is the process of consultation, which I mentioned before, tends to be a criteria where there is a reasonable level of non-compliance, and we are doing some work at the moment to try and improve that. And the other one is the one around how effectiveness is assessed. So there's still a little bit of maturing to be done, I think, in how businesses not only describe what they're doing, but also how they measure that and kind of what's coming out of those measurements. And lastly, I just wanted to talk very quickly about some of the AI opportunities that I see. As I said, we assess each statement for compliance. So I think there is a great opportunity for a more automated approach to compliance assessments, and that's obviously something that that Adriana and QUT have also been doing work in. I think there's two ways of looking at that. One of them is the kind of post-submission way, which is once we've got the statement, we have to do it anyway. So having that assessment be done more quickly and more efficiently would be a great gain to us. But even pre-submission would be also I think, a great gain to us and to business, insofar as it would allow them to do an assessment prior to submitting to say, yes, this statement meets all the things that it should meet. I think another even bigger one in a way is what is the quality and internal consistency of those statements. So the ones that are of higher quality tend to indicate, I think, that business really do understand what they're doing and really do understand what their supply chains and the risk is. And the internal consistency that flows through all those connected pieces of the statement. So from the understanding of risk through to what actions are being taken through to effectiveness, I think would be a very useful way of being able to understand the quality of statements, both at an individual statement level, but also at a systemic whole of statement population type level. And the other thing that we've been thinking about is the systemic risks and the systemic opportunities that are all in these statements. And of course, there's a massive data in the statements. They, at the moment, primarily get looked at individually, but I think AI would give us the opportunity to look more systemically at all of those statements in collective and say, well, what are the systemic risk factors? What are the things that are similar about them? And where are those similarities occurring? Is it in particular supply chains? Is it in particular countries? Is it in particular products? And be able to see what business is telling us at a more systemic level. Similarly, I think looking across everyone and understanding what's effective in terms of responses, what tools are being used to understand and do due diligence across the marketplace and how are they working, what assurance techniques are being taken, what KPIs are out there. So it would be looking across the whole body of them. And I think in terms of what we're trying to get out of that then is that we can invest our resources better. So rather than doing lots of low value work, that our people resources can be focused on higher value stuff. I think in terms of transparency, the quicker that we can get things out to market, so each statement out there, it supports a better transparency, but also enhancing transparency by providing some of these additional pieces of analysis, I think would be really useful, say for an investor or for a consumer to be able to consume that information much more quickly. And I think also the better leverage of that data that's sitting there on the register to be able to make new insights that we currently can't do, and be able to be scalable in a way that that meets the growing volume of statements would also be really useful to us, because every year they are increasing the number of statements that we're receiving. All right, I think that brings me to the end of my thoughts. So I will hand over to Adriana again and stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Pierre, for this wonderful presentation. I'm inviting now Caroline to present us the Canadian Act and learn a little bit more about how they're assessing the statements.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll just give a second here for my colleague to get the presentation up. And I'll just confirm that everyone can hear me okay and see the screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we will get started. Thank you again for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be a part of this event and to speak to Canada's supply chain transparency legislation, the Fighting Against Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chains Act. It's a very long title, so we frequently refer to it as the Supply Chains Act. And I will be referring to it as the Supply Chains Act moving forward in this presentation. I will take Oh, sorry. Was someone interjecting there? Nope. Okay. So I'll take a similar approach to Pierre in the presentation. We'll provide some background on the Act and implementation, the internal processes that we undertake to gather and analyze the data that comes in. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that we've experienced and gaps where AI solutions could be helpful in supporting effective implementation. So we will go to the next slide. And can I ask that we do the full screen view if possible? And if not, could we try to go to slide 2?
Who is sharing? Sorry.
So my colleague, Louis Philippe, he is sharing his screen. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. So is that view okay for everyone?
I think this is presenter notes view rather than the full screen of the...
Okay.
So it should be the other screen, I think, and then press full screen sharing.
Okay, so maybe we go back to, is that
perfect.
better?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
This is great.
Great, okay. Thank you, Louis, for troubleshooting that, and I'm glad that we arrived here in the end. Okay, so about the Supply Chains Act. So Canada's Supply Chains Act came into force on January 1st, 2024. So this act represents a first step for Canada in combating forced labor and child labor. Similar to the Australian and United Kingdom's legislation, the purpose of our act is to increase transparency around forced labor and child labor and to encourage responsible business practices through public reporting obligations. So under our act, certain government institutions, so Canadian government institutions, as well as private sector entities, are required to report annually on the steps being taken to prevent and reduce risks of forced labor and child labor in their supply chains. This requirement applies to government institutions that are producing, purchasing, or distributing goods, and entities that are producing goods or importing goods produced outside of Canada. And those two terms, government institutions as well as entities, are defined in the legislation. So they have prescribed definitions in our act. So the act requires that these organizations submit their reports by May 31st every year. And those reports have to cover the activities of that organization's previous financial year. Similarly, again, to our colleagues' legislation, the reports must include certain information. So requirements for the report to include are the organizational structure, activities, and supply chains, description of those things, as well as information related to the organization's policies and due diligence processes, where they have identified risks along their supply chain, as well as any remediation measures that the organization has taken, any relevant training that's provided to their employees on the topic of forced labor and child labor, as well as how the organization assesses its effectiveness in these efforts and actions to address risks. There are also several administrative or technical requirements that these organizations must consider when developing their report. So for example, entities must ensure that their submission includes a signed attestation of approval from their governing body. So that's a similar requirement to the Australian legislation. Specifically, this one applies to the government institutions only. As per the Official Languages Act, they must submit their reports in both English and French. And additionally, all organizations that submit a report are also responsible to publish their reports in a prominent place on their own website. So the Act requires that we, Public Safety Canada, maintain a public registry of all of the reports that are filed under the Act. And we also are responsible to deliver an annual report to Parliament, which summarizes the outcomes of the previous reporting cycle. So the first 2 years, as we have only 2 reporting cycles under our belt at this point, we've been very focused on providing clarification to some of the key terms in the Act, supporting entities and government institutions in understanding the expectations and how to fulfill their obligations, developing reporting guidance, and gathering feedback to improve the approach moving forward. So I think we can go to the next slide. Hopefully. There we go. Perfect. So now we'll talk a little bit about the reporting process and our internal data collection and analysis approach. So Public Safety Canada uses various tools and internal services to collect and analyze the reporting data and to publish these reports in the online registry. This registry, or catalog is what we call it, of reports is accessible through our website, and you'll see a screenshot here on the slide of our website homepage. And this includes a link to the registry as well as links to our reporting guidance, which we developed to support organizations in the process and, again, to clarify expectations for this new reporting regime. So there's also on the slide an overview of the key steps in the reporting process. So first step is organizations must prepare their PDF report that addresses the legislative requirements. And we recommend that organizations refer to our online guidance as they prepare their report to ensure that they're adequately addressing each of these requirements. Once complete, reports are submitted to Public Safety Canada using an online questionnaire. So this is the mechanism for submitting the annual report to public safety. It is a questionnaire that collects information that also responds to the Act's reporting requirements. The questionnaire is also used to support the development of our annual report to Parliament, which summarizes the outcomes of the reporting cycle. Entities are expected to ensure that their responses to the questionnaire are accurate and that the information provided via questionnaire is consistent with their annual report, which is the PDF that is uploaded at the end of the questionnaire. So there are 2 components. They have to complete the questionnaire, and at the end, they upload their PDF report. And that is what is next reviewed for publication in the catalog. So once we have conducted a high-level quality review process of reports, then they go on the catalog. Now, the quality review process is it's manually conducted by my team, and it is to ensure that reports meet the minimum standards for publication in the catalog. So for example, officials will review the reports to ensure that they contain information that responds to the Supply Chains Act. Sometimes we receive documents that are not relevant to the Supply Chains Act, and we do not publish those in the catalog. Additionally, we check every report that we receive from entities to ensure that it includes the signed attestation of approval from the governing body. And if it does not, then it is not published in the catalog, and we actually reach out to that entity advising of the issue and asking them to address it so that it can be published. So if the quality assurance process is passed, Reports are then published with select submission information, so the entity's name and year, for example. And as mentioned, in the interest of transparency, we do publish reports that may not be compliant with every requirement in the Act, but that meet the minimum standards for publication. So once we have our reporting data, that is used to develop our annual report to Parliament in accordance with the Act. So the Act provides several requirements for our report that we develop as well. If you're interested, our 2024 report to Parliament is available online. There's a link there on our webpage. And we anticipate that our 2025 annual report will be tabled by the end of this month and then will be published by the end of October. So happy to share that link once it's available. It is also worth noting, in addition to facilitating the report intake process and the cataloging process, my team supports implementation through several ongoing activities, such as stakeholder engagement to promote awareness and gather feedback, developing and updating guidance materials, collaborating with partners, both federal and international partners. We have a dedicated mailbox to inquiries about the Supply Chains Act, and we distribute a quarterly news bulletin to keep stakeholders informed of any updates. And this should transition to the next slide nicely. We're always looking for potential opportunities to improve and streamline our reporting process. Okay, perfect. So this slide outlines some of the challenges that we have faced in the 2 years of implementation that we have so far. So there have been several challenges that we've faced in the first 2 years. Some of these could potentially be supported through increased use of automated processes and or AI tools. So we have some ideas here that we've put on the slide for consideration. But in terms of the challenges, one of the key challenges faced by our relatively small team is the sheer volume of reports that we receive under the Act. So we've had in our first 2 years over 11,000 reports received. And because most of our review processes remain very manual in nature, this becomes very labor intensive, as you can imagine. So we do recognize that there may be opportunities to leverage solutions in this exercise and to reduce burden by automating the review and triage of the PDF reports. So for example, this could help us identify where reports don't meet those minimum technical or administrative requirements. So if they do not have the signed attestation, for example. Another big challenge for us is the validation of information. So due to, again, the amount of data that we receive and the time and resource limitations that we're faced with, we can't verify the completeness or accuracy of all of the information that's submitted, nor the information reported in a questionnaire versus the information that's reported in the corresponding PDF report. So as we enter our third reporting cycle, we're hoping to adopt some improved processes that will more readily enable us to evaluate the quality and compliance of the reports that we receive. And lastly, I'll just mention as a third key challenge, we've found it quite challenging to draw meaningful conclusions from the data, and we're aspiring to strengthen this process moving forward. So, for example, assessing improvements and tracking progress in reporting maturity over time would be an area of interest. Determining what additional actions organizations have taken in response to the transparency requirements, identifying the effectiveness of our guidance materials and all of our implementation activities, and opportunities for improvement there. If there's a relationship between remediation measures and the reporting requirements, and what is the most effective in preventing forced labor from occurring. There's several other thoughts and ideas that we have on this slide here as well. These were just results of a brainstorming session with the team. So we've put them here just for consideration. But I think we'll stop there, and we can go to the next slide. I don't think there's anything on there. I think it's just a thank you slide. So I'll thank you for listening to the presentation and for your interest in supporting effective implementation of the Supply Chains Act. I'll turn it back over to Adriana, but thank you again.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you all for putting those final slides there as well with ideas, because those are exactly the type of food for thoughts for the participants to think about how they can stand out among the other teams and see how many of those elements they can address. So now let's turn to the UK and learn a little bit more about the oldest modern slavery act that we have and everything that they have learned for now 10 years of having this act, and also about the template. Farid, back to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name is Farid. I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the UK. Just give me a second to work out how I do the slides on Zoom, because we rarely use it and we are too dependent on Microsoft Teams. But hopefully it should load up in a second.
No problem. And also, please ask your questions in the chat. We're already collecting some very interesting questions that we can ask at the end of the presentation. And don't be shy, put them all in the chat. We can see your slide.
Cool. Can you see it properly right now while I'm sort of flicking through?
Yeah, we can see it moving, but it's not full screen yet.
Ooh, how do I do that?
It's on the bottom.
There, yeah. Is that
Perfect.
okay?
Yeah, that looks perfect. Thank you.
Cool, thanks guys. So yeah, I will not talk too much about the background to sort of the issues of modern slavery, because I think Pierre covered that, but essentially it's exploitative practices to maximize profits. 50 million people across the world are living in modern slavery. It creates a lot of profits, illicit profits annually, and there are some interesting stats from the ILO that if you were to free people from forced labor and bring them into the formal economy, you could generate an additional almost 500 billion pounds in global GDP every year. So, in terms of the legislation we have in the UK, under Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act, which was introduced in 2015, businesses who operate in the UK and have a turnover of £36 million or more must publish an annual statement on the steps that they are taking to tackle modern slavery in their operations and global supply chains. So very similar to what colleagues from Canada and Australia have talked about. The statements need to be approved by the board, signed off by a director, and also available via the homepage of their website. And they should also be published within 6 months of their financial year end. Those are the legal requirements. There's nothing beyond that. The reason why we don't actually have very stringent legal requirements is that this was a relatively innovative piece of legislation back in 2015. And also, if I'm being frank, a last minute add-on to the Modern Slavery Act as a means of trying to get businesses to think about and take action on risks of exploitation in their supply chains. And the idea at the time was very much to create legislation that would allow consumers, investors, the media, and civil society to sort of scrutinize how these companies are tackling modern slavery, and for those stakeholders to be the ones that are trying to drive up business standards. There's been a lot of criticism in the UK that government should take a stronger approach to enforcement and actually enforce the legislation itself rather than relying on stakeholders. And that is something that the current government is considering, and we are looking very closely at what our friends in Australia and Canada are doing in this space. Okay, and in terms of what the legislation encourages, it encourages companies to report on these 6 areas that are listed in the Act and are very similar to what Pierre was talking about earlier on. So, just to talk a bit about our modern slavery statement registry as well. This is a voluntary registry, so not mandatory, but again something that the government is considering to make mandatory. It's where companies can also submit their modern slavery statements. We've got over 19,600 statements at the moment, covering 32,500 organizations. And earlier this year, we launched a data dashboard which summarizes some of the data held on the registry, and we are looking to continuously improve that and provide more data on how companies are tackling modern slavery and reporting on that in their modern slavery statements. So what we're actually here for to talk about today is to sort of share some initial brainstorming and ideas on how we think AI could help, because there are various challenges that we see in transparency reporting. One being that there are, well, just sort of scene setting, there are lots of modern slavery statements out there that are high quality and sort of explain the meaningful actions organizations are taking, and they a lot of businesses do a really great job, but there are also some businesses who produce quite poor quality statements that don't really articulate what they're doing very well. And I think that's sort of one of the challenges that we see in terms of quality of statements, and it might be an area that AI could help in trying to identify those quality issues. The other thing that we see is they vary in length. You'll see some statements that are dozens and dozens of pages long, but are padded with, corporate social responsibility fluff, as we call it. And then there's some that are just, less than a page and don't really say anything about where the risks are. There are also, more and more companies are being transparent about, finding specific cases of exploitation. So I think in the top 100 listed companies in the UK, it was somewhere around 20 to 30% have now started disclosing specific cases that they found in their supply chains. And I joined the team back in 2017, and in those days, hardly anyone was reporting that. So yeah, we still have a long way to go, but I think there definitely has been improvement in transparency. But yeah, more to do in that space. The other issue with modern slavery statements are that we're not able to sort of verify the accuracy of these qualitative statements. There's thousands of them that are being published. We have to sort of take companies for their word in what they say. And is there anything interesting that AI could do to help in that area? And yeah, there's plenty of statements out there that don't meet those administrative requirements of having board approvals signed off by the director. And yeah, at the moment in the UK, as I said, they're not mandated to publish on the registry. So that makes it even harder to enforce the legislation. But yeah, in terms of specific suggestions we want to put out there, how AI could help. One is, assessing the quality of statements and tracking, the improvements companies are making year on year, or highlighting that there aren't actually any improvements, because some of these companies have been publishing statements for almost a decade or now. So it'll be actually quite useful to see whether companies are actually just retelling the same story or they are actually improving. I think AI could be very helpful in providing guidance to companies on how they can improve their statements, and therefore the action that underpins those statements. But it's also important to balance that against not encouraging companies to sort of game the system or take a tick box approach when they've got that very simple direction on how they could improve their statement. The other things that we think would be interesting to look at is do the claims made in statements match publicly available data about the company or their supply chain? So you'll see a lot of companies who produce statements saying that they have no issues in their supply chains at all, but if you were to do a quick Google, you would see that they are actually listed in various media articles or trade union articles, or civil society raising concerns, and then those concerns aren't really covered in their statement. So could you have an AI tool that helps sort of analyze statements and compare that against publicly available data? Yeah, the other thing was around, whether statements have been drafted by AI, and can this be easily identified and stayed, kind of like, when you're submitting your essay for your university course, there's a system it goes through that pulls out whether that essay has actually been drafted by you or has it just been drafted by AI. And also whether AI can determine whether a company is in scope of relevant legislative criteria, because there are loads of different modern slavery and other human rights type legislation out there. It would be quite useful to know if a company is in scope of those, when the legislative criteria will obviously be different depending on the legislation. So just to move on to something else that we wanted to talk about today, but in order to get to that, I have to provide a little bit of background, and that is we've got a guidance document that we encourage businesses in the UK to use when they publish their modern slavery statements. It was first published back in 2015. It was very much focused on legal compliance and administrative requirements, but we got a lot of feedback from businesses that they are familiar with those. It's not rocket science to meet those requirements. They wanted more guidance on how they should be tackling modern slavery. How do they actually produce a better quality modern slavery statement? How should they be improving year on year? So we got together a very large group, I'd say between 50 to 60 stakeholders from businesses, civil society organizations, academics, trade unions, to put their heads together and basically revamp this guidance, which we launched back in March this year. And the whole purpose of it was to support businesses not meet only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And while we were going through that process, we reached out to our friends in Australia and Canada. And this is one of the things that we really wanted to highlight to the group today. This is, so we've got this group between the UK, US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, called the Principles to Combat Human Trafficking in Supply Chains, which our countries endorsed back in 2018, I think it was, that we would collaborate on initiatives to tackle forced labor in supply chains. And through this group, we collaborated really closely with Australia and Canada, who have, very, as you've heard today, quite similar transparency reporting requirements to us. And we thought it'd be a good idea to try to create this one transparency reporting template, which would support businesses produce one non-slavery statement for all three countries. So although there are differences in the legislative requirements, definitions, and scope, the three pieces of legislation have many similarities and have a common goal as well, and that is to promote transparency and encourage responsible business practices to address labor exploitation. So what this template does is it's an optional template, and it provides one consistent set of advice on what businesses should cover in their modern slavery statements to meet the requirements in all three countries. This will, one, help reduce the administrative burden for businesses subject to the reporting requirements in all three countries. But we think it will also be really helpful in sending a very clear message around what good practice looks like, with all three countries singing from the same hymn sheet. And sort of beyond helping businesses, we also think this template will be a really useful benchmarking tool as well, which organizations will be able to use to assess whether companies are producing high quality modern slavery statements or not. So the template itself covers 7 themes we want companies to cover in their statements. There is detailed advice within each of these themes, but they cover, background on sort of the company and their supply chains, the policies, risk management, due diligence and remediation, training, measuring effectiveness, and any other info. So you'd have heard from, the presentations today. Basically a mix of what everyone's legislation requires. And then, sorry, let me just go to the next slide. Yeah, under each of those themes, we include level 1 and level 2 guidance. So level 1 is information that we think organizations should disclose in their statements, and in their non-slavery statements. And then level 2 is sort of the recommended information organizations can disclose in addition to level 1. So I think a few of us have mentioned the sort of year-on-year progress approach that we encourage. It's sort of encouraging companies try to start doing everything in level 1, and once you're there, you can start moving up to level 2. There'll be some circumstances where businesses might actually be at level 2 in certain areas and at level 1 in others. So what we would also say is that the guidance does set quite a high bar, and I personally haven't seen any company in the UK produce a non-slavery statement that meets all of the issues that are listed under level 1 and level 2. But that's okay because it's about continuous improvement and moving up the levels, trying to cover as much ground as you can if it's relevant to your business and your non-slavery statement. So we won't have time. Literally we're run out of time to walk through all of the 7 themes, but just to quickly show you what it looks like. So like this is one of the themes on risk management. It starts off with the legislative references for all 3 countries, and then that's just sort of for background information, and then covers the specific level 1 and level 2 info to include in the statement. So this is, for level 1 is disclosed when the organization carried out the risk assessment and how often this is updated. And then level 2, when it comes to risk assessment frequency, is to provide that information, but also provide evidence that the risk assessments are regularly reviewed and updated. This is just sort of more sort of guidance for level 1 and level 2 reporting under the risk assessment theme. And remember, that's 1 theme out of 7. Level 2 generally asks for more detailed information and evidence to what the level 1 element asks for. So that is just another screenshot of what the risk assessment section looks like. But yeah, you've got 7 themes and they basically look like that. And I think Adriana might be able to help later on talk through this if people have more questions as well. But I will wrap up there and hand back to Adriana.
Thank you so much. And indeed, we have a workshop plan in about 27 minutes to go in depth through this reporting template. So if you would like to learn more, you can join me and I'll answer all your questions. We have some really good questions in the chat. If you'll allow me, I'll ask 1 or 2 of them before closing remarks. So we have here a question asking about how are you identifying who is in the scope of the legislation? So how are you identifying the companies that are meeting the threshold or the number of employees? And do you think AI can help or data science can help the government in that identification? I know, Farid, you alluded to that, but I'll pass this question to you to explain it a little bit more. Any of you, how do you identify the companies in scope of the law?
Maybe I can jump in first. So we have to use a comparison with other forms of information that go to what a company's revenues are to identify those entities that do meet that threshold. I think from an AI perspective, there are obviously government sources of information that go to a company's revenues, but there are also other public sources of information that would go to that. So there are potential uses, I think, of AI to be able to identify that. And I think there's also collections of information that once put together would also tell you a picture about what consolidated revenue look like. So there are opportunities there, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Caroline, we have a question regarding the questionnaire you mentioned. Is there any chance we can have the participants can have access to the questions that the businesses are asked to complete when submitting the statement? Or is this information already public?
Yes, so the questions themselves are public. That's on our website. So I can add the link here in the chat as well. But there's an option on our submit a report page to view all the questions in the questionnaire without actually launching the questionnaire. So I would recommend using that function. It's a link that says view questions here, and then it'll drop down with all of the questions that are asked. It is 2 parts. So there's one part that would apply to entities and the other that would apply to government institutions. But all the questions are available.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. And maybe just before we wrap up, just want to thank you all again so much for your time, especially joining so early in Australia, so late in the UK, but just all the time you put into making these wonderful presentations. And we will share the recording, so make sure you stop at those wonderful slides where each of the government put forward opportunities to develop AI and really think about how can you incorporate in your solutions any of these particular elements, because that would really make your team stand out, but also to think about future research projects and potential collaborations. So before we wrap up this, I would like to ask the panelists before we close if you have any advice for the hackathon participants on how to build AI solutions that are actually going to be useful for you to make compliance more effective and meaningful, particularly for people on the ground. So final thoughts and some advice, if you don't mind. I'll pass to Caroline.
Sure. So I'm very glad this session was recorded. I think we had some ideas and advice that were presented on the last slide of the presentation that point to specific gaps that we identified that we thought would be a good fit for an AI solution. So I would recommend revisiting that slide. In addition, I would recommend reviewing our guidance material that's online if you have any questions related to the requirements of the Act, the scope of the Act, the guidance that we're providing to entities and government institutions, the questions that are asked in the questionnaire. It should all be accessible through our website.
Thank you. Farid?
Thanks. Yeah, like Caroline, I think the slides have some ideas, but just broadly speaking, this sort of the way I look at sort of trying to tackle forced labor in supply chains is a game of carrots and sticks. So how can AI help companies? What's the carrot in helping them trying to tackle modern slavery and produce better modern slavery statements? So, can AI actually give them some useful tips when they assess their statements and provide good recommendations? And then the sticks are around, how can it help actually identify those who are not taking their responsibilities seriously, highlighting that and trying to get them to care about it. So yeah, broadly speaking, that's the sort of framework I use for this.
Thank you. And Pierre?
I would probably echo what the other two have said, that we've got some slides in there that give ideas. But the other thing I would say is don't limit yourself to those ones, because the great value of these hackathon type things is that people come up with entirely new and innovative ideas, and you guys are the ones who've got the data expertise to be able to come up with even greater ideas. I think the other thing that I would say is that one of the big challenges for us is actually understanding the modern slavery risk itself, because it's a very complex problem. I mean, supply chains on their own are extremely complex. Where modern slavery occurs within them, within a context of products, movements of products, production chains that now are not like all in one place like they used to be. So if there are things that we can do to better understand that, which would drive our efforts into the right places better, I think that would be of great value as well.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your time and for all your extra time for today. We really appreciate all the insights you share, and I'm excited to hear where this to see where the solutions will look like, how they will look like. Once again, we're meeting in 20 minutes to discuss the template a little bit in a little bit more details. We have more questions coming in, but unfortunately the time is not on our side anymore. So just wanted to thank the speakers once again for your time, and I will make sure to try to answer other questions in the follow-up sessions. So with this, I am happy to close the sessions, and once again excited to see the solutions that you are going to build. Have a lovely rest of the day or night, depending on where you are in the world, and I'll see you all very soon.